Hello. Y'all know the story of Mary and Martha, don't you? As Luke tells it, Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and one day he stops in a certain village where two sisters, Mary and Martha, live. Martha takes the initiative, welcomes Jesus into their home, and begins preparing for him as fancy a meal as she can. There's nothing unusual about this. Showing hospitality, welcoming guests, feeding them well. These were very important virtues in that culture, and Martha's doing her best to show hospitality to Jesus and to make him feel at home. But while she's busily working away on the food, her sister Mary does something unusual. Mary chooses not to help out. Instead, she sits quietly at Jesus' feet like a student or disciple would and listens intently to what Jesus is saying. Well, finally, Martha gets tired of doing all the work while Mary sits, and she lets her feelings be known. She tries to get Jesus to tell Mary to get to work. "Lord, don't you care?" she protests. "Don't you care that my sister's left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Well, what he does, and this is what's bothered a lot of people through the years, is to gently scold Martha and then apparently take Mary's side in the dispute. "Martha, Martha," Jesus says, "you're worried and distracted by many things, but there's need of only one thing. Mary has chosen it. Mary has chosen the better part." So why does Jesus praise Mary over against hard-working, worn-out Martha? Why does he say that Mary, who simply sits and listens, has chosen the better part than Martha, who's sweating away, preparing a meal, and trying to provide some hospitality? Has Martha, preoccupied with her chores, missed the deeper spiritual point? Or isn't this passive-seeming Mary different from many of the other prominent, powerful, worthy, articulate, celebrated women in Luke's Gospel? Well, whatever side you might take, the fact remains that Christian faith is never an abstract, disembodied, purely spiritualized thing. It always takes on solid, embodied, active form. After all, God's love came in the fleshly form of Jesus, who dwelt among us and got involved in the messy details of everyday life, who taught and healed and touched and ate and gathered and died and rose in bodily form. The incarnation means that the place to find God is not in otherworldly thoughts, but in the earthy details. Martha was not being hospitable in the abstract, and her cooking the meal that day was not trivial. Hospitality finally means that somebody's got to boil the water, somebody's got to slice the onions. Ultimately, you just cannot neatly separate love of neighbor and love of God. In the Christian life, they're intertwined, mixed together. You can hardly tell where one ends and the other begins. We show our love of God by loving our neighbor, and the true love of neighbor grows out of our love of God. They're two sides of the same coin. There's nothing wrong in and of itself with Martha's fixing the food. This is the way people show love and welcome and hospitality and care. There's nothing wrong, in fact. There's something absolutely essential about showing one's love of God and neighbor by baking the bread and washing the olives, by putting out those bottles of glue in Sunday school and serving supper down at 5th Street. But if we try to do this kind of service apart from the life-giving word of the gospel, apart from the vision that comes only from God, it will distract us and finally wear us down. Mary has chosen to listen to Jesus, the living Word who is present right in her house. And if she's going to love God and love neighbor, she's going to show hospitality to the stranger and care for the lost, then everything depends on hearing and trusting that Word. If you don't have some vision of what God's doing, it finally beats you down. Mary sits at Jesus' feet and listens to his word, to that vision. With that word, that vision, though, we can prepare meals for the hungry, care tenderly for the sick, show hospitality to the stranger, and keep on loving and living in the name of Christ. What we hear from Jesus is that our lives are gathered into God's life, that God is out there in the world healing and feeding and restoring, and therefore that what we do for others counts, really counts, and we can trust God and hope for God's new creation. So, sit like Mary at his feet and listen to his life-giving word. Then, having heard that word, get up like Martha and serve others in Jesus' name. See you soon.